Hi, everyone. Sorry for those technical glitches. That was all on my end. This is a little bit new for me, but welcome to Diverse Voices, dedicated to sharing leadership stories with viewers. Hi, LinkedIn. Hi, YouTube. Our special guest is Dave Ciliberto. He and I were having a delightful conversation. So Dave comes to us as an individual with 25 years of leadership and expertise in diversity and inclusion. He teaches at Cornell. That's how he came to my view. My husband attended some of his courses. Dave, thanks for joining us. Sorry for the glitches on our end. You know, we'll fix that in post. I think it'll be fine. We're getting some pings from people about just being offline. So thank you for joining us from the beach.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, no worries. Technicality issues happen constantly. So it's how we handle them that's most important. But I'm thrilled to be here and celebrating June Pride Month for our community, LGBTQ plus, here in the Fire Island Pines gay community. Woo.
I love it. A little jealous of you being out on the beach, but I appreciate you bringing it back to Pines. I think maybe there are some viewers who know of the history of the Pines, of the LGBTQ community. You know, they may come to us as an ally or otherwise, but maybe we could start the conversation really looking at how Pride has changed over the years and the history of Pride, just to sort of level set, you know, the changes in time.
Sure. From my point of view, and I was like, Pride, everything that was rooted in Pride initially was literally protests and demanding equal rights and acceptance and safety and fair treatment. And that is one thing, that's how it started, and it continues that way year after year, which means we have made some progress, but not all the progress that we need, clearly. But I will say this, that I just read something from GLAAD on a statement about what's happening currently. So I'm just going to mention these statistics, which I think are important, that, you know, the spirit of Pride is needed throughout the year, not just in 1 month. And that is because recently what's been happening in 2021, over 250 anti-LGBTQ plus bills are introduced in state legislations across the United States targeting transgender people and youth. And literally to the point where they will criminalize doctors for providing life-affirming care to transgender youth. Okay, all right, it pisses me off. So that's part of legislation. The other thing is, which is, people don't know this, but it needs to be verbalized. So far in 2021, right, 27 murders reported, and they're the ones reported, of transgender, Black, and Latinx women. Okay, lives are being lost in 2021 because of hate. And it's not just our own community, it's many other communities, Black and brown people. But, you know, this is where Pride Month, we are proud of where we've come to, we're proud of who we are, but the fight continues for equality and rights.
Yeah, I think the issue of those in power pushing down those who are not like them has been going on for centuries. I mean, it extends way beyond the few hundred years that America's been around. I think for many ways, it is a solution in search of a problem. When you don't have these kind of influences in your life, you make assumptions. And therefore, the narrative becomes transgender individuals, LGBTQ individuals, whomever it may be, whatever diversity is not like me is an issue, is because there's not a degree of exposure. And I think that's where PFLAG has been really influential, because they start to allow people who may not have family members who are LGBTQ in their lives to find the commonality with someone from PFLAG, who's like, look, I'm a parent just like you. I have concerns about my family, my safety in the same way. I want my kids to grow up healthy. That kind of experience, I think, is a shared experience, and really allows people to understand that there's a story to be told, and a story that I think creates that emotional connection that's so valuable. You've talked a little bit in the past about storytelling opening hearts and minds. Can you talk a little bit about what that can look like, and why that narrative, why storytelling is such a great mechanism?
I'd love to. And storytelling is part of all my content in my DE&I programs, diversity, equity, inclusion, and B, belonging. at Cornell. And Cornell, my participants are all HR professionals and DE&I professionals. So we're not undergrad or graduate, but we're people in the working world professionally who have an impact in their own organizations. They take our certification program for D&I. But we weave in storytelling because it gives us a glimpse into somebody else's lens and experience that might not be ours. But the paradox is any differences we have will unite us through shared experiences. And it's a quote I use all the time. It is a paradox. You can't have differences without what? Similarities. You can't have privilege without oppression. You can't have advantage without disadvantage. These are the paradoxes of the universe that we work within. But storytelling gives me a chance to understand somebody else's lens, and they get to understand my lens. And then we can have dialogue about that. And yes, it's about our differences, but it's about our connections. And that is the outcome of storytelling. And we do this in many ways in the programs that I teach at Cornell and also my own consulting practice. Like, for example, sharing an aha, uh-oh moment that something moved you that was either inclusive or exclusive, related to diversity or lack of. And it's very moving to hear someone's story, just an introduction in a program, to get a sense of who they are, but also how they think and what they've experienced based on what? Their intersectionality,
Right.
who they are.
Well, and storytelling is a mechanism that existed in journalism for forever. It's a great way to bring people to the table and help tell what's going on in the news, what's going on in the world. And it's a mechanism that started carrying over into marketing and advertising. And I think there's this interesting intersectionality that you and I share, which is the idea that storytelling is so very valuable. There's, from an HR lens, it's a great way to bring elements to life. But from a brand standpoint, it's a great way to start to talk to the diversity of a workforce. It's a great way to really impact a brand and the communication in many ways, the markets that they serve. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the impact of diverse workforce demographics on brands. Do you think you can shed a little bit of light on that?
Sure. This is one of the critical things about who we are as people and human beings in the products and services we buy and need, and the organizations that provide them. So we want to be represented. So if organizations are tapping into their diverse demographic of people, so ERGs, employee resource groups, whether it's Black, Latin, Asian, LGBTQ, ability, disability, generational, you have a wealth of lens and experience to help your organization tap into the marketplace, but also represent me. So, I always go back to this commercial I love from Campbell Soups about after the movie Star Wars came out, two gay dads and their son, and they represented me. I'm not a dad, but I'm gay and I have a husband. So the interesting thing is that now they create a story that I relate to, right? Because if they had a straight couple, I don't relate to that story. I relate to the gay story. So they know their customer base. And even though they got pushback from the religious right, their response was, well, maybe you need some soup to warm your soul, which I think was brilliant. And they're opening minds and opening hearts. We're not changing minds necessarily, but first we have to open them. And then we can create change. But I think that creates brand statements, what you stand for, who you support, and it has an impact on the community. And I'll just mention P&G has a phenomenal series of commercials for race, for Black and brown people. The talk, the look, the choice. And these are a way to get a glimpse of what it's like to live in brown or Black skin that others would not know. And the micro inequities and the microaggressions faced every single day. And that storytelling includes a lot of people.
Well, it's all about exposure. I think your point of storytelling is truly about exposure of stories. Hearing stories about a life super similar to mine, the benefit of that is it becomes a mechanism into a deeper story, right? Finding that commonality of being married or being white or being Jewish or whatever being the youngest child of a family could be the story narrative but then taking that twist and turn and showing there is some common belief, some shared heritage, some shared experiences, I think exposes us to understand, someone is like me. There's elements of the way that Gillette recently in 2019 brought that narrative of being a man to life and exposed it in such a different way, where, maybe a generation or more ago, being a man meant being tough, never crying. Some had interpreted that as being taking ownership of your spouse, or ownership, and treating property in a certain way. Now being a man is taking responsibility, but also owning your emotions and owning your role in a conversation. So I think there's something to be said for the way in which brands and storytelling, narratives, communication can be great mechanisms by which an organization exposes their employees to dimensions of diversity. And I think to the idea of intersectionality, yes, it was founded against the 7 major types of diversity, but now we start to understand that those dimensions of diversity can merely be a lived experience. That, again, my example of being the youngest child could merely mean that I share a story with someone else who was the youngest child of being chased around the house or the yard by an elder sibling. It can be shared, it can be funny, it can be scary too. So I think that there's those lived experiences that can be talked to. But speaking of being chased, again, friendly and safe space, I think about the way in which we can support each other. As we're talking about how do leaders ensure that their company makes Pride Month a meaningful experience, there's an opportunity to dig in a little deeper to how can people find ways to support their employees, even where policies or laws restrict LGBTQ plus activity. We're seeing that a lot. You brought it up earlier with some of the transgender laws. I think it shows up in some other countries. So how can you support employees locally and globally as an organization?
Yeah, and this is huge, Michael. So thank you for bringing it up. Number one, safety. Am I safe to be who I am in this organization? Because guess what? Prior to this administration, society wasn't safe for many of us. And we have a new administration, thankfully, with some support. And it's the first time President Biden, uses the words transgender brothers and sisters, LGBTQ, my gay brothers and sisters, my lesbian sisters. It's amazing to hear President Biden use the words, because that's a leader, right? Not afraid to have the dialogue. So the dialogue, that's one important thing of, it's not just Pride Month. Continue the dialogue, the storytelling, the impact of it. And organizations do lots of different things, like panel discussions. So when I worked as a consultant for a French bank, we had a panel discussion, and we had allies on the panel about stories when their employees came out to them and how they supported them in that story. One was a CEO of a French bank. And it was just amazing to hear that point of view, because we really felt safe and comfortable that we have such a strong ally at a high level. So visibility is important for us. Allyship is important, but also the simple stuff. And you have this, and I was in a rush to put my name on, our pronouns, right? Our pronouns. Putting pronouns in your Zoom name, in your email signature. This is a statement of inclusion for all, right? Because you may assume I have he, him. I might use they. And it's all about respect. So, this is one little point. The other thing is your EEO statement as an organization better be more protective than state, federal, and local law, right? Because that creates safety, that you won't discriminate or harass based on all these things of what? Our intersectionality. And to define that, it's, as you said, it's literally who you are and how you were brought up. But, me as a gay man in his mid-50s, married to a Latin man from another country who's an immigrant, and that's my lens as number 3 out of 4 as siblings with divorced parents, Catholic, no longer, altar boy, ew. But this is all my multidimensional intersectionality of how I come and how I show up. But back to your point, what we could do is continue the celebration in a sense of support with policies, programs, and systems. So anyone that uses Workday, you can choose male, female, non-binary. So do it. Your
Right.
applications, when people are checking boxes, make sure the boxes make sense. Unlike our census boxes, more than one race. That doesn't represent people. That's cold. That's, those are a couple things. The other is October 11th is Coming Out Day. Celebrate Coming Out Day. The more visible, the more out we are in our entire community, LGBTQ plus is critical. So continue the celebration by storytelling, by support, fighting the laws that are against us. Organizations have a voice. CEOs have a voice to stand for what's right. And if you remember, based on the recent jury convicting the murder of George Floyd, CEOs came out with statements saying, this is a right decision and we have a lot of work to do, and I support the decision was made and we're going to keep going. Okay, that's huge. More of that could be utilized as leaders in our community in the United States that have a voice from a business presence that actually has a positive impact on how we operate. So I'm a little tangential, going a little all over the place, but this is where what companies stand for, how they message through commercials, through branding, through their statements, through their support of their resource groups, through volunteerism, through foundations, through donating money. When I was running diversity for the Americas at an investment bank, Lambda Legal was one of my top areas I provided money to and support. Why? Because they have an impact on legislation, which changes laws, which gives us equal rights. It is huge.
Well, I love, even though there was a lot to that, there's that element of safety that I think is worth returning to. I recognize that when you're focused on your safety, your security, some of the small aggressions that may exist intentionally or unintentionally in the workplace, it's distracting, and therefore you're not able to focus on the job at hand. When values are only the statements on the wall and the organization doesn't appreciate the behavior that's showing up in the workplace, there's a true cultural issue, and that becomes an opportunity for the organizations and for those leaders to lead. You mentioned leadership just a few minutes ago, and I remember reading that there's only 4 Fortune 500 companies, Apple, Dow, Macy's, and Land O'Lakes, that are led by openly LGBTQ plus CEOs. I was reading that research shows that these individuals may have a harder time getting to the top. So seeing them as leaders is fantastic. I know that the CEO from Dow had their own coming out experience, and I think it was 2014. So sounding homosexual, looking at covering as being an issue, but sounding homosexual can reduce a person's chances of being considered suitable for a leadership position. Obviously, Tim Cook and others are showing that is not the case. They are able to lead very competently just by being themselves, being their whole selves. So there's the idea that representation matters. And I think that when we look at leaders and what we can draw from them, how we can look at their storytelling and the narrative that they bring, what is the impact on LGBTQ plus in management? How does that have a positive effect?
I mean, it's big. More needs to be done, but this is awesome that we know of 3 CEOs that are in our community, right? That's huge. So role modeling, setting the stage is huge. This is where, when people think about a diverse lens, this is part of our community as well as others, but when we talk about promotion criteria, does someone have a bias if someone's effeminate? Does someone have a bias if someone sounds too gay, to your point? The story is, and the storytelling is, so I have a friend who works for a company and they did a little video for Gay Pride to say, I was told not to fill in the blank. I was told not to be so gay. I was told not to be so out. I was told not to be such a prominent figure for rights because it sends messages. Recently, I did a workshop for a client and I was telling my story about being Catholic, and then all the messages I got from the Catholic Church and religious figures, I won't call them leaders, about, where are homosexuals going to end up? In hell. And so one of the people said, well, we have some very religious people in our participants. Maybe you want to explain that. And I'm like, I did explain it. The church told me I was going to burn in hell. It was a message that I was conditioned to understand and digest since early as a child, which I fought against as I became an adolescent because of my journey. I will not explain anything other than that's the impact it had on me. That's my story. I'm not going to adapt my story because someone else is uncomfortable. They need to stretch a little to understand my lens, and I will try to understand theirs. But that all has that realm of what we're referencing here on safety, but also the safety of being visible and performing well and being recognized for that impact in an organizational culture, which then paves the way for others. Mm-hmm. And we know many organizations have employee resource groups that are LGBTQ, but do they have succession planning? And is that included? Is there a D&I on career development, succession planning? Is there an intent to get a multitude of lenses within a group to actually be more innovative and creative?
Oh yeah, and I think to the end of to looking at the DEI lens, there is an element of when so much happened with Black Lives Matter, with the pandemic, many organizations were looking around saying, where are our leaders? Where are our diverse leaders? And in truth, the opportunity to foster and grow those leaders actually started 5, 10, 15 years ago, finding them, working with colleges that have a high amount of Black and brown students. Those are the opportunities, tapping into those resources instead of looking to the traditional Ivy League schools. Those are the opportunities to really bring forth leaders and foster that growth. When we're seeing a little bit of pushback around Pride, I think that there's a lot of young people, and actually myself included, who wonder why organizations focus on Pride only in June. Can't they look at talking about the LGBTQ plus community all year round? Now, I really admonish and really encourage that there's opportunities to recognize the heritage that exists throughout the year. That's why we have those moments in time. To your point around ERGs, there's opportunities for cross-education and intersectionality. But what would you like to encourage from organizations in supporting their employees all year round?
Well, there's some simple things that organizations can do, and many are doing. So, for example, I was in a rush to put my name in, so I didn't put my pronouns. You did. Using pronouns is really important for inclusivity because not everyone has the same pronoun that you would assume they might have. So for me, I might be typing they, not he, him. You don't know. You might assume what I do. So signatures in emails with pronouns, welcome all who might have different pronouns. Your Zoom name, putting your pronouns in it. In my Cornell programs, one of the things we do in our ground rules is everyone change your name on Zoom to include your pronouns, please, so that it welcomes anyone with different pronouns. It's just, an easy data point. We're not making huge statements here. We're just being inclusive. That's one. Your EEO statement needs to be fully inclusive. And that's a really important thing that we look at. What you present and message in your website on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what's presented there, and your D&I or IND statement, and what you stand for. These are important things that we look at. The other thing I'll mention, any organization that actually completes the HRC, Human Rights Campaign, Corporate Equality Index, and gets a high score is more supportive of LGBTQ plus. And I look at that data, right? So if I'm looking for a job, I'm going to use that as a data point, that you're ready for me, unless you're hiring me to get you ready. That's a different story. But those are some things that we pay attention to. The other are, the continuing the dialogue, that your leadership programs and leadership curriculum should include unconscious bias, right? That whole intensity of you don't know what you don't know until it's presented to you. Now you could do something about it. But weaving that into curriculum for leaders is critical.
Yeah, and I think that building that into the curriculum for leaders also offers an opportunity for us to revisit that intersectionality, that maybe during Pride, certainly we have people who are LGBTQ plus, but we can also showcase their other dimensions of diversity. Having a panel that shows that degree of, if there is an individual who is Black or brown on the panel, having a woman on the panel, you're immediately showing intersectionality. There's, I don't know why, this odd assumption for many that LGBTQ plus is, well, it's just the gay guy. And it doesn't have to be, but bringing those voices together allows people in those conversations and those dialogues to talk about, yes, here's what I can say about Pride, or if it's showing up at a different time of the year, here's what I can say about that Heritage Month. But there's also another layer to it that it gets exposed, and I think can be really encouraged. To your point around pronouns, there's also the opportunity for organizations to leverage their HRIS system and build that into, it's nothing anyone can escape. You know, you kind of encourage it gently and forcefully, but it is part of policies and procedures. I think there's a lot to it. I have loved this conversation. I want to just end on maybe one or two other questions, if I could. There's been a lot that we've experienced in this pandemic, and I'm wondering if there's one learning from the pandemic that you are carrying with you into the future in your work.
Great. And I think we've all learned a number of things in the pandemic. For me, it's number one, take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And your own safety, both physically and emotionally, is really a critical thing to pay attention to. And we know that there's been an increase in anxiety and emotional stress throughout the pandemic. And we need to recognize that. So being compassionate from that point of view is really important, that you know, I continue to go through, because you have no idea what anxiety level people have, you know, except for your close friends or your family. But that's one of the things, is we have to always be in the forefront of taking care of ourselves first and recognizing when we need a break and actually asking for what we need. And that's really important, because this 24/7 Zoom world, technologically, you know, that we are now working from home all the time, is really a stress for many. So having healthy boundaries is really important, for myself included. As a consultant, I've never been busier in my life. I've never turned down work before, because I need healthy balance in my life. So that's one thing I'm taking away.
I think that's fantastic. I recognize that so many of us have gotten views into our colleagues and coworkers' homes that we never had before. They were hiding in some way. They were able to show up the way they wanted in a very guarded setting. Now we're meeting their cats, their dogs, their family members. We're seeing their experiences. And I think organizations are trying to find that balance. Dave, I want to thank you for sharing your leadership story with us, with your viewers. Your diverse voice is one I want to crow from the rooftops. And thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been an honor. Thank you so much, Michael.
All right. Well, we'll see you again on the other side. Thank you, and enjoy the day. All right.
Thanks, you too. Bye, everyone.